This is ABC Radio Melbourne with Ellie Moore.
You might have heard on this program a few weeks ago, we were talking about getting new jobs, trying to get new jobs, and Jamie joined us. Here's what Jamie had to say.
My story is I'm 64 and it's so hard to get a job interview. I'm a marketer by profession. I have a good CV, great experience. I know how to sell myself. I can't get past the first door.
Why do you think it is? Do you think it's your age?
I'm fairly sure it's my age. I mean, most people think marketers are, 20s and 30s whiz-bangs, but they just lack the breadth and depth of experience that someone like me has. I've taken my birthday off the CV and I've dropped the early jobs that I had to, give the impression that I started to work later in my life.
Has it made a difference?
No.
So that's the experience of Jamie. How do you apply for a job? How much can you sell yourself before you sort of might fall into deception? If you've got a question about applying for a job in 2024, 1300 222 774. John Georgioski is the Director and Principal Consultant at Alpha Resumes. John, welcome to Drive.
Hi, Ali. Thanks for having me today.
Let's just go straight to that question. How much can you spice up your job resume? How far can you go?
I think that's a really good question. And in my view, we need to look at a resume as a marketing document and something that someone's putting out there to get their story across the right way. But that being said, it is a marketing document. It's not a history of every single thing that we've done in our lives.
But there's truth in marketing or truth in whatever. Isn't there some sort of requirement?
Absolutely. As an ex-marketer myself, I fully understand and comprehend that. But again, when we put that lens on things, we start to look at things a little bit differently and we start to think, well, what does an employer really want to see? What's my narrative? What's the unique value that I bring into this role? And how am I going to solve their problems? If we're giving them those solutions and providing enough insight to hopefully get some engagement, well, that's what a really good marketing document should do. And of course, that's our resume before we start looking at other avenues like LinkedIn and exploring socials, and all of a sudden this toolkit that an employee has to prepare for themselves and get ready to face employment in 2024 starts to look a little bit different. And like everything, we need to have a bit of a strategy for that, because if we're just going out there sending off our resume and hoping for the best, we're probably not going to get the same results that we might have some time ago.
But sure, I mean, if I take a really specific example, and it's not a huge thing, but let's say you need to be absolutely competent in Excel. You've never done it before.
Yeah, really.
But you're pretty confident you might be able to learn it between now and the job interview or taking the job. What do you do?
What we tend to find in job ads, there are a list of specifications, obviously, that employees are looking for when they're looking for a candidate. And sometimes we match some of those skills. Sometimes we match all of those skills. When we don't, we can still say that we've got knowledge in a particular area or some understanding of that subject matter. And nowadays, with the likes of things like LinkedIn Learning, we can very quickly go and do a short course. We don't have to proclaim to be experts at that subject, but by simply gaining a little bit of knowledge or gaining that skill or mentioning it even on our resume, and we'll come to that around how tracking and software works for these things, we can at least get that initial hurdle or foot in the door.
So how would I put that on my resume? I want to mention it because it's a requirement of the job. I know nothing about it.
So I'd suggest to clients in that sort of a space that we maybe do a little bit of research. We maybe do go and do a short course that could just take a couple of hours on somewhere like LinkedIn Learning or an online platform, and then we can at least say we've got that skill or we've got some knowledge in that space.
You could always just say we have a full appreciation of the capabilities of Excel spreadsheets, which wouldn't necessarily say whether we know how to use them or not.
That's a really nice way of wordsmithing it there. And look, people do go and make those claims, but I find the difficulty with that is when we say that we've got expertise in something, we're going to come unstuck later, whether that's at the interview, whether that's in a job where we purely can't perform. So I try and encourage people to be honest with the content that they're providing, but we can workshop it in different ways and really look at a way of getting those other skills across. Perhaps in a previous role there's been skills that someone's lacked and they've been able to pick them up really quickly. Chances are the person in that role right now didn't have a lot of the skills that they have when they started that role. So
if you've got a question about applying for a job in 2024, 1300 222 774, how to put together the resume, how to cope with the online interview, John Georgioski is with you to answer your questions. Roz has called from Bulleen. Hi, Roz.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm all about integrity. I studied marketing and taught it for a little while. I wonder whether people could do the values in action character strength survey, and then they could realistically say these are my top character strengths, and the top 5 are known as signature strengths. And if we use them and they come naturally to us, we're likely to feel good and function well. How does that sound?
Is that, Ross, is that something that you've used when you've been either in the workplace or applying for a job?
I have. And things like love of learning, curiosity, perseverance, and I use them to this day, yes.
John, are they the sorts of things that you should be bringing to the fore, those sorts of character strengths, and indeed talking about a sort of almost a list of them, a hierarchy of them?
I think it's really a great idea to integrate some of those skills there. What's really important, though, as a candidate is that we're thoroughly looking at the job ads for each role that we're applying for. Whilst it's great to have a resume that outlines our strengths, when we're applying for jobs online today, our resume goes into what's called ATS, or applicant tracking software, most of the time. And what that will do is actually look at the job ad that a recruiter has posted and look at your resume, scan it and assess it. And you might have a great resume that sells a really compelling story, and I absolutely empower people to do that. But if we don't have the skills that they're looking for in the job ad, chances are that it's not even going to get through software, let alone get human eyeballs on it.
A point that Mal's making on the text is not a human reading your online resume anyway, at least not at the outset. It's not. So what does that mean for how you structure that original one? Do you need to really make sure, I mean, it sort of almost sounds simplistic, but do you take the list of what they've asked for and literally in that order address each one?
I don't suggest that we just go and make a list and put a whole pile of keywords in there, because whilst we might get through software, we're probably not going to make a great impression on a recruiter or someone who's actually reading it. But absolutely, by having a strength-based resume where we do incorporate a number of our skills or strengths, we do get through that hurdle. And by doing a bit of a sanity check each time before we're applying for a role and looking at the job ad and going, what are they actually looking for? And have I covered that? And if we've got some of those skills, whether they're addressed in a skills section or speckled through the content in our CV, we can start to set ourselves up for success on that front.
We are talking applying for a job. How do you put together the resume? How do you cope with the interview? John Georgiowski is with you from Alpha Resumes. We'll continue the conversation. Keep your calls coming, 1300 222 774 if you've got a question for John. We'll just pause and have a quick look at the traffic with Caroline Ferguson.
ABC Radio Melbourne. Traffic.
Thanks, Sally. And Hawthorn on Barkers Road. Right lanes closed both ways at Auburn Road due to a collision. You can get through, but there are lengthy delays. You might want to take Burwood Road instead. Also, Victoria Police is still attending, and the tow trucks are yet to arrive, so it'll be there for a little while yet. On the Princes Freeway outbound towards Geelong, underneath Corrick Creek Road, the left lane's closed due to a police incident. This is pushing traffic back on the Westgate Freeway towards Grieve Parade. And traffic in both directions of the Western Freeway sharing lanes between Bacchus Marsh and Milton. It's still September from Port and Bridgeworks. That's the latest in traffic and transport. It's 9 to 6.
On the ABC Listen app, your smart speaker, and on 774 AM.
This is ABC Radio Melbourne with Ellie Moore.
If you want to know how to apply for a job, how do you put together the resume? How do you deal with the video interview? How do you deal with the live interview? 1300 222 774 is the number. Our Work It Out conversation. John Georgiowski is with you. John, just on the gilding the lily question, I don't know, this is going back a long time, but you quite possibly have read the former Chief Operating Officer of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. And it's really that book is really notable for the fact that she highlights the differences between men and women in gilding the lily. Her point is that in her experience, men will look at what a job requires, whether they've got it or not. They'll sell themselves on those attributes, and they'll work on the basis that they can pick themselves up, learn on the job, that they're quick enough to do it. Women, in her view, were more likely to go, oh no, don't have that, might be able to get this, be a lot more sort of I suppose in some ways truthful about it, but less selling yourself. Do you think that still happens, or do you think now times have changed completely?
I do still see that a bit in my practice and with the people I work with, but I think inherently a lot of people just don't love selling themselves, with
Male
the
and
exception
female.
perhaps of salespeople. But yeah, male and female. And that's not to say they're not fantastic at their jobs, but when it comes to putting it down to paper, it's all of a sudden, oh, I'm humble, or I don't want to go too far there, or we just don't want to really make ourselves to sound like something that we're not. And some people are great at doing that, but nowadays I think most people just want to get across their true value, but they become stuck. It becomes that discussion in your head of what do I put in, what don't I put in, what's important, or I'm just doing my job.
So how do you advise people to get over that dislike of, marketing themselves?
I think we really need to sit down and objectively look at what have we done through our role. Quite often with clients, I say to people, well, think about when you started in the role and think about where you've got to now and how have you grown? What are some skills perhaps that you've gained that you didn't have before? What are some things that you've done really well, some projects you've worked on? Then we can start to unpack those. A big mistake a lot of people make is they look at their resumes and they read more like a position description or a list of bullet points from a job ad. That doesn't tell me whether you were a top performer or someone who barely scraped along. So that's where we can start to go, oh, well, the fact that you completed that project on time, well, that's an achievement. You've really done a good job there. Or that you contributed to the launch of a new project or some sort of software rollout. Let's talk about that and unpack that. Even if you weren't the manager, the fact that you were involved in some way, let's get those skills out, because if you're not doing that, someone else is.
Yeah, so real life example of what you've achieved. Jen's in Mitcham. Hi, Jen.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
I've just got a question about getting through an interview and references. So they want to get a reference from my current boss, and I'm not quite sure about letting my current boss know that I want to leave.
Really good question there, Jen, and something I face a lot as well. And when we are working in a job, the last thing we want to do is jeopardise that. Typically nowadays, the good news is when you're asked for referees, it's really the end part of the interview process. It tends to be that last checkbox. If you do have some doubts around that, you can always clarify that with the hiring manager or recruiter around where they're at in the employment process, or potentially seek out some other references. Ask them, is it okay to speak with a colleague or someone else who can back something up, or perhaps speak with a past employer from another organisation.
Jen, it's quite scary though, isn't it? Because I know I do, I read of examples of people who have given references and then found out. In fact, I have this is not me, but someone very close to me had this happen to them, that they went for another job and it was fed back very quickly to the people that they worked with. So
exactly, yeah, I've been there for a long time, so it's hard to get a previous employer too, because that was a long time ago. So,
but Jen can just say to them, "This is my concern." Just be open about the concern.
I think being open and honest is so important that, last thing we want to do is jeopardise any current employment that we've got. And perhaps, is it okay that we can speak with a client or perhaps a colleague or someone else I've worked with, or perhaps you've got copies of performance reviews or emails from management to show you've done a great job. Sometimes they can be used, as a different approach to your formal reference checks as well.
Jen, good luck with that. I've got a text here just saying, what's the sort of not perfect, but what's the best way of setting out the resume? You don't want it to just be a whole series of bullet points. So should it just be, these are the jobs that I've had? Should it be more discursive, if you like, and sort of talk about key projects? How should it go?
Yeah, really good question. I think there's really three big things we need to take into consideration when preparing a resume. And firstly, it's the measurement test. Have I got numbers? Have I got metrics to be able to back up what I did? And if I did, how did I go about doing it? That ensures that we've got those tangible examples that I spoke about earlier that show,
what do you mean?
So I can solve a business problem. So it might be that, I increased sales by 80% through effective new marketing, prospecting businesses, as opposed to just increased sales or looked at sales revenue. So that's one of them. We also need to look at the skim test. If someone is really quickly skimming this resume, as a recruiter will often do, can they quickly see who I am and what I have to offer, generally on that first page or in the first 5 or 10 seconds?
Do you still need a cover letter?
Cover letter's a really interesting question. I'd always recommend people to include a cover letter with their application.
But a short one?
A short one, absolutely, with the exception of government and roles where there are often key selection criteria. Different process there. But yeah, keep it short. It's some bait to get them looking at the resume. And even if the recruiter doesn't read it, the hiring manager probably will.
Cirrus is in queue. Hi, Cirrus.
Hi.
Do you have a question?
Yes. So I'm an autistic person, and one thing I've noticed is a lot of times jobs are having these aptitude assessments and, the sort of position selection where a lot of the questions they ask is often very similar to, autism and ADHD screening questions, questions which don't really seem to have much to do with the job, like, would you prefer to go to the library or would you prefer to, stay at home? And is this an intentional sort of pivot by HR or, these softwares to sort of find the ideal candidate and weed out neurodivergent voices?
Good question, Cirrus. John?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of these aptitude tests, more than anything, can be designed to find out whether you're being honest and not just answering questions in a particular way. I tend to find they'll often frame many questions the same sort of way or ask the same thing in multiple ways. And the idea is they get a feel for, is this person suitable in our type of environment? And if you're honest and it's the type of work you like to do, chances are you should do okay on those types of questions. When we start to answer different questions in different ways, when they're asking the same thing, they're thinking we might be tricking the system or being a little bit dishonest there. That's some of my personal findings relating to those tests. I don't love them myself, but again, different employers do use different metrics as part of their assessments.
We're almost out of time, but I've got a lovely text here saying, I also keep copies of positive feedback that I've received from clients, which is a good thing to use. But just a very quick question. If you don't get the job, can you ask for feedback?
Absolutely you can. Will you get it? Maybe, maybe not, but it doesn't hurt with asking. Any contact you can have with recruiters or potential employers to open up doors in the future or gain some insights is going to help us improve. And the most important thing, don't put yourself down too much. Take what you can as a learning and aim to do what you can to improve.
John, thank you for being part of Work It Out.
No, pleasure being here today, Ali.
We'll get John Georgiowski back to take more of your questions on another Work It Out conversation after the 6 o'clock.